Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Oh my goodness. Every time I hear that song, every time I sing it to myself, what was known when I was growing up as the Negro National Anthem, now referred to perhaps as the African American National Anthem, or Lift Every Voice and Sing, every time it pulls me back into small town Texas, where I was raised. And almost every high school assembly, every Friday, we would sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's a sacred song for me. And we would stand and we would lift our voices in that intro, that oh so familiar intro, and we would join our voices and we'd sing all choruses. We'd sing all verses. I just sang the first verse, the first stanza. Lift every voice and sing. And I do love the song. So it's a sacred song to me. So I don't want people playing around with it. I don't want people fooling around with it. I don't want people pulling it out of their Black History Month backpack to say, see, we're acknowledging you guys. I want it to be recognized as a song that's personal to a lot of African Americans, especially of my generation and the generation before me. So, in honor of Black History Month, here I am. And before I was Black, I was Negro. Before I was Black, I was Negro. So I'm going to share just a little bit of my history with you. I was going through my Dropbox, which I have not gone through in a long time. And I was going through it and I came across this piece, this writing. And I know I wrote it. I don't know why I wrote it. Maybe I wrote it for a program that I did back when I was on air as a radio broadcaster or as a talk show host. I don't know. But I started reading and I thought, wow, how great is the timing? It's Black History Month. I'm going to share some of this. And what shall I call it? Before I was Black, I was Negro. I tell people all the time, hey, my generation, the generations before me, it took us a while to connect with James and said, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. Call him Black back in the day meant you was the women were getting ready to take their earrings off and the men to put their fist up because a fight was about to be on. Now Black doesn't bother me so much. Colored, on the other hand, yeah, don't call me colored. Please don't. I don't like it. But Black and African American and even Negro, if you pronounce it correctly, I can get with it. So anyway, let's jump off into this. I'm going to be reading, but I'll probably add remarks in between. I'm just pulling from this piece, and it will be in parts. It'll be in segments because it's too long for one podcast. The South stays in your blood long after you escape its clutches. I should know. I have been a non-resident of the South since 1972, but I still feel like a Southerner. I expected to be free of the South's pull Once I flew out of the reach of its repressive attitude about my designated place within its boundaries. I was wrong. I dreamed of California freedom long before I packed my 1973 duster full of my things and headed west. California was the place where the flower children of my generation threw off the bonds of authority to declare themselves and their love free. I would not be as brave. I would not be as brave as they. Free love was still a bit much for a newly emancipated Southerner. Still, I shook the dust of the Texas soil from my feet and declared myself a free agent in my new home of self-determination. Or so I thought. I thought, I'm headed for the big time. I'm headed for the free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. I was born Negro in San Antonio, Texas. I was raised in a community that lived on the other side of the fence. We would envy the greener grass just over the fence beyond our reach. We would even wonder how it felt to walk on that greener grass and live in its lushness. But we could only think and wonder about the other side of the fence because a no trespassing sign had been erected on the property by Jim Crow, and my community was trained by the guerrilla tactics of the keepers of the gate to not even think about trying to get in, or to at least not look like we wanted to get in. I was born in San Antonio because my mother decided to leave the country of Crispin, Texas, to go to the big city and attend beauty school. You know, I often wonder if she attended one of Madam C.J. Walker's beauty schools. She probably did, and I never asked that question. Did you attend Madam C.J. Walker's beauty school? You know why I never asked the question? Because it was years and years later, after I was long gone from the house, after I was long gone from her doing my hair in the kitchen with the hot comb pressing my hair, I did not know to ask that question. I wish I had. I assumed that she did attend Madam C.J. Walker's beauty school. Anyway, there my mother met a man who was also from the country, but his homestead was Mississippi, Indianola, Mississippi, Sunflower County, which I learned later was one of the most violent counties in the state of Mississippi. His enlistment papers showed that he was a farm laborer, Reed, son of a sharecropper, before he joined the Air Force. Probably his escape from the tentacles of never-ending servitude in a Mississippi field. They met, and I was born a Southerner. And in the South, I lived for a while, unwittingly buying into the subliminal message that I would never be more than an insignificant consequence of that union. Wow. How about that? Insignificant me. Every time I attend a high school reunion, I return to California feeling like a failure. My community sowed its own internal discord, which reaped a crop of self-hatred. The minute seeds of self-loathing were planted in the community's heart by the greener grass crowd, and those seeds quickly took root in our souls. The self-hatred took two forms, color and hair. To have dark skin and nappy hair was practically seen as the physical manifestation of the curse of Ham, the Bible story the dominant culture used to use to justify our plight. Ham, one of Noah's sons, was cursed to be a servant to his brothers after seeing his father Noah in a naked, drunken stupor. I'm not sure why Ham was cursed, since his brothers also saw Daddy Noah in that same state. But rather than mock him, they covered him with a blanket. Perhaps it had something to do with their compassion on their father's weakness. Ham just looked and laughed. Ham's disdain of his father led to his becoming a slave to his brothers. The culture that despised us taught us to despise ourselves. Since we all lived on the same side of the tracks, status was not determined by what neighborhood you lived in, but by your hair texture and skin color. Yeah, that's all really just kind of interesting, isn't it? The things that we do to one another, the things that we have said about one another to one another. To have nappy hair and dark skin was practically seen as the physical manifestation of the curse of Ham. The culture that despised us taught us to despise ourselves. Since we all lived on the same side of the tracks, status was not determined by what neighborhood you lived in, but hair texture and skin color. I think I may have said that already, but maybe it needs to be said again. Light skin, also lovingly referred to as high yellow, was very much esteemed and reverenced in our community. Good hair was that hair that did not need the heat of a metal comb to stretch its tight curls into straight submission. Good hair was cherished in our community. An awe-inspiring combination of color and hair trumped almost any other deficiency a child so blessed might have. A high yellow child with good hair could have 3 eyes, one right smack in the middle of his or her forehead, and the only thing anyone would say would be, "Child, put one of those curls over that eye, baby. You are so pretty." I was dark-skinned, but I did have shoulder-length hair. My hair was not good hair by my community standards, but because of its length, it was given some status in the community. When I was in high school, some years later, a boy told me that not many girls of my skin tone had long hair. He meant this, and I took it at the time as a compliment. My color led to sarcastic nicknames like Cotton and Sunshine. When I was chosen for the role of Snow White in an elementary school play, one of the boys said that because I was chosen for that part in the play should be called Snow Black. I, therefore, stood somewhere between grace for my hair length and condemnation for the color of my skin. I was not the popular girl in high school. I was not the pretty girl. I was the smart kid, the teacher pleaser, the driven overachiever. I was the girl in everything who did everything well. I wasn't really that good at everything, but I knew how to look like I had it all together. My confident facade, however, covered an easily wounded heart that did not believe in Donna. I was the introvert who lived my life in my head most of the time. My cool exterior belied the anxiety that ran amok on the inside. The more anxious I was on the inside, the more reserved I became on the outside. The kids thought I was uppity, stuck up. One boy even wrote in my graduation memory book, "You are a nice grill," he spelled girl, G-R-I-L, "but you think too much of yourself." This would have hurt my feelings, I guess, had he not misspelled girl. We didn't know about dyslexia in those days. I feel like going home. I was channel surfing when I stumbled across, back in the day, a few years back, Henry Louis Gates Jr. talking with Oprah Winfrey. Oprah was not interviewing Gates on this PBS program. Gates was interviewing Oprah, talking to her about her family tree. The program, African American Lives, had Gates talk with some well-known African Americans from a cross-section of careers, from media to entertainment to religion to education. The group included individuals whose pictures have appeared on the cover of Time and whose balance sheets have been spread within the covers of Forbes. The mission of the program was twofold. Number one, to track the genealogical lines of each individual as far back as possible, and two, through a new kind of DNA testing, pinpoint the geographical source of each person's DNA. In other words, that part of the world where there are people who have the same strain of DNA. Gates presented each participant with their genealogies and the results of their DNA test, and their responses were solemn, almost reverent. Each just smiled and quietly stared at the information. A reflective, calm wonder in their faces as they silently took in the information that was placed before them. That which had once been a family mystery was now tangible and real, and though many of them had probably achieved more than they ever imagined they would, they were given a priceless gift, the missing piece of a family history. I cried as I watched their faces. I was glad for them, but I was also jealous. I wanted to be the one whose life puzzle was now more complete. I wanted to sit in calm amazement, point to that place on a world globe and say to me, "That's where your line began, Donna. That's where you began." And I have since taken that DNA test. I took it maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and it showed majority of Cameroon and Nigeria. I updated it because technology has gotten better and they're able to do more with the DNA than they did when I first took it. And now Cameroon is greater than Nigeria as far as percentage points. But what has always stuck out to me is the fact that United Kingdom remains 11%. And I find that quite interesting because I've always wanted to go to London. I went to London a couple of years ago and I'm going back. I've always just wanted to go to England. I don't know if that can be built into your DNA. I'm not sure that it can. But 11% DNA, yeah, it's a throwback to my ancestors who were slaves, I'm sure. Um, but my grandfather left a blurb about his mother. And he said his mother was part Cherokee, and some Native Americans showed up this time in my line, but it's very minute. It's just a small percentage. But my grandfather said that his mother was half Cherokee. I don't know what the other half was. My grandfather had gray eyes. He had curly hair. On my grandmother's side, she had a grandfather or a relative. I think she said her grandfather that they called the African. No name, just the African. I've been able to go back to the 1940 census and grandparents pull up my grandparents' line and have seen some things there. I find most interesting that my aunt, who passed away in 2013, was noted as a servant girl. And my aunt retired. She retired as a supervisor over an accounting department at Naval Air in Alameda. So, yeah, you can have small beginnings, but that doesn't need to stop you from becoming all that you can become. Going back to this piece that I wrote, my nostalgia, referring back to the DNA, is not just about African American history here in America, though that is part of the puzzle. African American history in America is but a continuation of a history that began in Africa, the rest of the story. I want to know the beginning. How differently would I see myself in America if I knew that homeland in Africa? February is Black History Month, and though I have my reservations about this one short month homage to Black history, I enter into this collective memorial because I am African American. Someone, somewhere, will most certainly hold a soul food event, a commemoration of our food, the throwaway parts of the pig, and other such stuff that the slave owners gave to the slaves. Our ancestors dressed it up, and this is the food our mothers and grandmothers turned into today's gourmet fare of our culture. Oh yeah, I still love me some soul food. And what's so funny, because I was raised in Texas, we didn't really eat a lot of quote unquote what is seen as soul food. Our beans were pinto beans, maybe that southwestern influence. But we were more barbecue and steak and potatoes, and I don't even remember my mother making macaroni and cheese. Maybe she did, and rice and peas. And she would make greens, but she made mustard greens, and I was not a mustard green fan. I didn't know about collard greens till I got to California and learned how to cook collard greens. I learned how to cook most soul food when I moved to California because we were real Texans when it came to food. Absolutely. Black-eyed peas, yes, but pinto beans, as I said, and rice and spaghetti. I even learned how to make Spanish rice way back when. I don't know how to make it now. I've forgotten how to make that. But that was all part of, and barbecued almost everything barbecued. My grandparents, I can remember breakfast after they had gotten paid and my grandfather had gone to the market. And there were these big red link sausages that we only had when they had money to go to market, to go to town and go shopping. No grocery stores, but markets. And there were these thick red links. They weren't hot links. Oh, but they were so good. I think about them even today and wish I could come across them somewhere. If I ever get back down to the town that was about 10 miles from where my grandmother lived, I'm going to the market and see if those links are in there and relive some of my childhood. So, we have a culture that is rich and full of passion. Our language is expressive and vivid. We laugh and we cry without embarrassment. We sing, shout, and dance, even in church. We embrace the broken because we know how it feels to be broken. We encourage the impotent because we know how it feels to be impotent. We marched arm in arm for freedom only to enjoy the fruits of that freedom in isolation, tokens that were expected to work harder with less, but we did work harder. But sometimes in the midst of the celebration, I think about my individual history. Where and when did I really begin? When I first moved to California, my sister and her friends were very much into Black studies. They were students at San Francisco State University and were a part of that in crowd of Black activists, professors, and students. I would sometimes tag along with them whenever they had meetings or group discussions. I was intrigued by their activism and bemused by their Black power fervor, since aside from my sister, all of them were born and raised in Northern California. When anyone asks, Donna, where are you from? I automatically respond, Texas. Texas is as far back as I go, even though I know that my ancestral line stretches across this country to a continent I have never seen. But the older I get, the more I wonder, when did my African ancestors stop thinking about going back home? When did he or she stop talking about home, never spoke of it to their children? Which one refused to share the story about villages and people and customs with their family? Why didn't they keep the story alive for posterity? At this stage in my life, I need to go back further than yesterday. I want to go back to that place where an ancient relative in whose eye, okay, yeah, sometimes, yeah, I just have to stop and take my time. In whose eyes my soul is reflected. I want to go back to that place where that ancient relative played underneath the village sacred tree. I want to go back to that village where an old griot, the oral historian, gathered the children of the village together to recite the oral history of a proud and majestic people. I can almost hear the wisdom in his voice, or her voice, as he talks. Young ones, look to the rising sun, but do not forget your yesterdays. Tell your children of those who walked before you in times of sacrifice and abundance. In times of sacrifice and abundance. Honor them in your hearts forever. Which ancestor forgot the griot's message? All of me, my mind, will, and emotions wants to know the source of my passions. Who was the storyteller, the singer, the laugher? I want to go back to there to dance and raise the dust in that ancient soil. I want to celebrate the survivors of the Middle Passage. I want to honor the people who endured and survived everything that happened to them in the New World, and as a result of their survival, my line was not extinguished. I want to go back to their homeland to pour out a drink offering onto the land from which they were so cruelly snatched. But not only do I want to go home and celebrate the survivors, I want to go home and honor the memory of the Africans who did not survive. Those who died ignominious deaths in the hold of a slave ship. I want to stand on African soil and weep for the man, the woman, the child, who jumped over the side of a slave ship, a watery grave more preferable than life as a slave. I will be a clack of one, weeping and wailing not only for the ones who were taken away, but also for the ones who were left behind with their heartbreak. Texas is the place where my mother was born, where all her children were born. Texas is the place where my maternal grandmother and grandfather are buried, where maternal aunts and uncles now rest in peace, where the ashes of a father, though from Mississippi, have a final resting place. Texas is where my mother lived, the place to which I returned every 2 years to celebrate the passing of time with old schoolmates. But Texas is not enough today. I want to be part of something more than just a group of people whose ancestors were forcibly brought to these shores. This yearning may just be an emotional mix of age and hormones, but I don't care. I want my rootedness, my word for the known roots of a family tree that connect me to a foreign soil watered centuries ago with the tears of a family whose loved ones disappeared. I want to stand in the homeland of loved ones who would never return for a family reunion or a homecoming celebration. I want to kneel on sacred soil that holds the bones of a people who mourned for the rest of their lives the father, the mother, the children who were snatched away. I want to honor the familiar love that held the memory of those loved ones in their hearts until they died and the memories vanished with them. I want to take off my shoes and stand on hollowed ground as a stand-in for the men and women who never returned. I am a descendant of the diaspora, the forced diaspora. I want to go home. This is just part one of this piece that I came across. And I'm sharing it with you because it's Black History Month, and I want you to think about your own history. And if you have relatives that are still alive who have lived through those times, then sit down and allow them to tell you their stories. Allow them to share with you what they thought and how they felt and how they feel. Just tap into your history and do the research. Go to ancestry.com, and this is not a plug for them, or whatever genealogical app you can find, or go to the Mormon temple because they're genius of genealogy and records, I have heard, and begin to backtrack as far as you can go. You may not have the resources that Henry Louis Gates has, but you can do some work. So I'm going to end this part one. Before I was Black, I was Negro, with a song that connects to that last line. I want to go home. Yeah. I feel like going on. I feel like going on. The trials come on every hand. I feel like going on. Until next time, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud.